Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's technique video, I will be integrating sentiments and floral stamps. I'll be using these Waffle Flower products today. The first up is the Love Stamp Set. It's a floral stamp set with many of the images having 2 layers. I'll also be using the Cutaway Alpha Stamp Set, but you could also use large sentiment stamps as well for this technique. And then I'll be using another floral stamp set. This is called Wild and Free. Again, a lot of the images have 2 layers. And then I'll be using this die set. It's called Lacy Layers 2. I'm using the largest scallop die. So I've already gone ahead and cut with that largest scallop die a panel out of white cardstock, and then I'll cut 2 more panels out of this very light blue cardstock. I'm going to start by adhering this white cardstock panel, scalloped panel, onto just a A2 panel. So the panel that I'm layering it onto is just 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm just using some tape adhesive to stick this down. This is going to be my guide. So I'd like it to be as centered as possible because I'm going to use this as a guide for the rest of my panels, my actual cards. And I'll show you more when I get to it. So I've already gone and adhered the blue scalloped panels onto my card bases. And I've done this because my blue paper is very, very thin. It's probably 65 weight, and I will be doing some embossing, and I don't want it to warp. So when it's on the card base, which is 110 pound weight, I reduce the warping I have with that very thin paper. So I've taken my guide here. So this is just the panel, the A2 panel with the lacy scallop panel already adhered onto it, and I'm going to center my sentiment that I create with the Cutaway Alpha Stamp Set. So I'm going to just make thanks, very simple. I'm going to center it here, and I'm using my acetate guide here that I created. This just helps to make sure all the letters are straight and my sentiment is in the center. So very easy to do, just fine tuning in here. Once I get all the letters nice and straight and the space between them equal, I'll fold my MISTI over here and pick those up. Now I'm going to remove that acetate, and I'm going to actually stamp that sentiment onto my guide. I'm just inking it up with, you can use any ink for this, something dark so you can see it. So now that I've got it stamped, I'm going to flip my MISTI around. If you have a smaller MISTI, you can still use this. You'll just remove the letters and then you'll have to put them back on, but you'll use the guide to help you get the letters right in the exact same spot. And I end up using my guide to get my florals in the right spot too, so it's basically a very similar process. I'm just saving myself one step by keeping the sentiment on the other half of the MISTI. Okay, so I'm pulling out some of the floral images from the Love Stamp Set and the Wild and Free Stamp Set, and I'm just going to kind of arrange them here. This is why I stamped that thanks, so I could see exactly where those letters were going to fall. And I'm now putting the floral elements kind of around here and incorporating them as best I can with the sentiment, so they kind of look like they're meant to be together. So I don't have any florals or leaves really outside of the area of where the sentiment is stamped. I was inspired by some Rifle Paper Company cards. A lot of their sentiments, they've incorporated florals with them, and I thought I would really like to try to create that look with some of the alphabet stamps that I have, and so that's how I came up with this idea. So I'm just about got all my floral elements kind of positioned where I want them to be, and then I'll take my MISTI and I'll fold it over and pick those up. Do that right now, just in a second. Make sure all those magnets are really important to have your panel in the corner, always in the corner for this, because I'll be using the guide as a reference, and if I didn't pick those stamps up when it fit perfectly in the corner, things won't be lined up right. Okay, so I just stamped those down now on the guide, and now I'm going to use the guide to kind of design and figure out where I want some of the floral elements to be in front of the thanks. Right now it's all one layer and it's kind of messy, but I'm picking some floral pieces here that I will kind of mask off and the letters then will appear to be behind portions of these floral elements. I'm picking some of the easier ones to make masks of, but I did take some finer leaves too, and I'll show you a trick for kind of not making a mask but still getting that look. Okay, so right now I'm going to pull off all the flowers, and I'm going to stamp all the leaves, all the greenery in one color. I'm going to use a Distress Oxide Broken China. So I'm going to stamp this right onto my actual card now, and I have everything in the right spot. I know everything's going to be exactly how it should be because I used that guide to help me position everything, and all my additional layers, my sentiment and the other layers of the flowers and leaves will all be using that guide as a reference. And I'll show you that all here, all that process in this video. Okay, so that's the very first layer, are the leaves or the greenery. And again, I just stamped that in a distressed ink or a Distress Oxide Broken China. Now, since I'm going through the trouble, I'm going to make 2 cards exactly the same. So I'm not doing anything different here, just inking it up and stamping it. And then by the end of the video, I'll have 2 cards that are exactly the same. Okay, so now I'm going back to my guide, and I'm going to do a little bit more planning. I want to plan out my colors for my flowers because that's the next thing I'm going to stamp. I've already done all the leaves, so now it's time for me to stamp the flowers. So these are the 3 colors that I'm using: Distress Oxide, Abandoned Coral, Distress Oxide, Picked Raspberry, and then a Memento Lilac Posies. And I'm going to kind of identify on here, mark with my pencil what part of the which flowers I want which color, and I'm just using the first initial of the color, so A for Abandoned Coral, P for Picked Raspberry, and L for the Lilac Posies. And this pre-planning will save me having to stamp the same color multiple times. I'll just do all the stamps in that one color all at one go. So this is kind of like suicide printing. If anybody has any print background, it's kind of like that. So I'm going to start with the Abandoned Coral because that's A. I'm just going to do it alphabetically so I can keep myself straight. So I'm pulling all the stamps from the 2 floral stamp sets off and positioning them on here. Some of them are the second layer to the some of the greenery images, and some of them I've already totally stamped the flowers that I've already stamped. So there's a center to some flowers and then some flowers that go at the end of some of the greenery. But all these are going to be stamped in the same color, so I'm stamping them in the Abandoned Coral. I'm going to ink them up here, and once I stamp all these, I will be done with Abandoned Coral. So that's kind of the whole point. So I'll just save myself from having to load my Misty up a couple of times to stamp one color. And I'm going to grab my second card here and do the exact same thing. And then I'll move on to my next color. And I use that guide to help me position those flowers and get them in the right spot. Some of them, like that large flower, I was able to use the image was stamped already on the guide, so I just lined the flower stamp up with the guide image. I'm going to do it again here. I'm going to move on to my next color, which is the Memento Lilac Posies. And I'm going to pull the stamps that correspond to those images that I want that color. So that's the center for that flower. I'm just going to pop them right in there using the guide to help me figure out where that center goes. And again, this is like another element to the greenery. And then here's the actual flower, so I'm lining that flower up right over the flower image. And the same with that one right there. I think actually that's the negative space one. And then I'm lining this flower right up over that image. And I'm going to fold this over and pick those up. So the guide just really helps me to do all the planning beforehand. Just on like a base, it's just a scrap, some scrap panels, but it just saves me a lot of trouble I don't have to stamp, and I can do all the thinking right there on the panel and on the guide, and then do the finalized image on my card bases. So it's just a nice way to not have to stress so much about your design. You've got it already planned out. And so I'm just stamping now those flower images with the lilac posy, and I'm done with that color. Now I'm on to my last color here. So I'm already lining up all the stamps that are going to be in the picked raspberry color. Some of them I can line right up over the stamped image, and some of them I'll just line them up like right, that one right there just is some berries that go on the end of the greenery. These are very simple two-step layering stamps. That's really, really simple, and if you don't get them perfectly lined up, they still look really pretty. I really like these two flower or floral stamp sets. They're very easy to use, and they just are just beautiful results. I just love how every card I make with these stamp sets, I just love how it turns out. Okay, so now I'm just inking up the last images here with the picked raspberry, and I'll stamp it. And this will be pretty much done. All the floral stamping will be pretty much done. There'll be one more thing we have to do, but we'll do that in a little bit. We're actually going to stamp the sentiment first. And I'll do the second panel here, finish up the second card with the picked raspberry as well, and stamp that. And now I'm going to move on to my sentiment. So I'm going to dry these really well. I'm actually going to use my heat gun to make sure the ink is totally dry, because the next thing I'm going to do is emboss my sentiment. So I don't want my sentiment to stick anywhere where the ink is still wet. So I'm going to really dry these two panels before I move on to the next step. But you see how pretty they look all finished. Okay, so the next step, before I can emboss, I have to make some quick masks. I'm only going to make masks for those 3 flowers that I decided I wanted to be over the sentiment. I'm not going to make masks for the 2 greenery sections because they are so fine. I again will show you a little trick to kind of remove the embossing powder. So I've got the masks cut out and put on the card base, and now I'm going to put down some anti-static powder and then ink it up in Versamark and then stamp it down. And I'm going to use some copper embossing powder here, pour it on top, and I forgot to move the masks, so I ended up putting it right on top of my masks, but that's okay. Once I peel them off, the embossing powder will be gone too. So I'm looking back at my guide here, reminding myself the 2 areas that I want to remove the embossing powder, so above that N and above that A. And I'm going to get out a couple brushes to kind of help brush off some embossing powder. And then the best thing for this, a needle. So this is kind of a wide needle here. If you have a tool that you use to get your paper out of your dies, you can use that too, something that has a fine tip. And I'm just going in those areas with that needle and kind of scraping off where the leaves are stamped. And once I scrape off that embossing powder, the leaf will now move to the foreground and it will look like it's in front of that sentiment. So it's a very simple, you could definitely make masks for this if you don't want to remove it, but those 2 images are very, very fine, and I thought the idea of making a mask for that was just too challenging. So I just scraped it off with a needle, and it's very, very easy to do. And the embossing powder kind of sticks to the needle, so you just kind of wipe it on a towel and keep moving that embossing powder off. So now I'm heat setting this after I've removed the masks for the 3 flowers, and there it's all done. And so I now have some of the images looking like some of the florals looking like they're over the stamped sentiment, and some of the florals behind the sentiment. So I really like this integrated look of the sentiment with the flowers. Now I'm just stamping the second layer to some of the leaves with it's a waffle flower ink. It's called New Fish and Pond. And the final step here, I'm going to take a gel pen, a white gel pen. This is just a jelly roll pen, and I'm going to color on the left side right along the edge of the embossed letter, kind of a shadow, and this will just add a little bit more depth to the sentiment and just help it pop a little bit more away from those background florals and just make it a little bit crisper and clearer. So I'm just going along the left side and the very bottom of the sentiment, and any of those, like the H and the A have a line in between them. I'm going at the bottom of that line, and this little detail here will really make this sentiment pop and separate it from those background florals. But you can see how that large flower there, because I masked it in the other smaller flower, how it appears to be in the foreground because it's in front of the stamped letters, but in reality they're all one layer. Okay, so that's completely done, and I'll pull over the other one here. And you can do this with lots of floral stamps. I think this would work really well with leaves, like a fall stamp set as well. I almost did that as well. I hope you guys enjoyed my video. Thanks for watching. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. I hope you all have a wonderful day.